Good afternoon, I'm Katie Wilson and you're watching Context. The Hamas-run Health Ministry says at least 27 people have been killed and 90 others injured by Israeli fire as they waited for aid distribution in Rafah in southern Gaza. The Israeli military says it fired shots near an aid complex after identifying several suspects, and it is examining reports of casualties. A medic in the area has told the BBC of total carnage and being overwhelmed with casualties. Israel does not allow international news organisations into Gaza, making verifying what is happening in the territory difficult. It comes after disputed reports about a similar incident on Sunday. Israel denied shooting Palestinians near an aid distribution site in southern Rafah. However, the Hamas-run Health Ministry said 31 people were killed and nearly 200 others were injured. The US Embassy has since waded in, denying that the shooting took place. They released a statement which says reckless and irresponsible reporting by major US news outlets is contributing to an anti-Semitic climate in the United States, referencing the murder of 2 people at an Israeli embassy event in Washington last month and the attack on a group of pro-Israel demonstrators in Colorado on Sunday. To unpack all of this, I'm joined by Dr. Melih Demirtas, researcher at Cappadocia University, and Middle East expert Tom Gross. Thank you for being with us, gentlemen. Now, Dr. Demirtas, I'm going to start with you. What is the latest on what we know so far about what's been happening in Rafah?
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. The critical times still continue, unfortunately, for Rafah, for Gaza, for all the Palestine, I think. The situation and the scenes, which are, of course, watching from this international media. Of course, there are different kinds of media, as we all know, but I think there is now a common voice and a common, objective, understanding that something's inhumanitarian still continues in especially Rafah, but in all over Gaza, I think. And we can see that this attempts, especially coordinated by United Nations, first of all, the agencies of United Nations, they are really obstructed, and they are really not so successful because of the strict and because of the dominant position of Israeli forces. We all know that, yes, Israel has important hesitation because of some security reasons. Many nation states can understand this, but the scenes, these are not normal. We cannot understand, and we cannot, explain how we can see such an atmosphere. I think with all these families, with all these babies and innocent people, starving, and still we cannot understand this negative position of these people.
The UN Human Rights Chief, they've actually spoken out, haven't they? The UN Human Rights Chief, they've actually spoken out on this.
They make many things. Mr. Antonio Guterres, this personality, I think it's one of the very important personalities since the foundation of the United Nations now. He's maybe made many attempts to declare that this conflict, this position of Israel really stimulates many other also violation of international law now in the world history, in the human history. And how we can, Mr. Netanyahu, explain such a position, even in Great Britain? Please do not forget that. I remember that with Mr. Gross, we had also a very fruitful discussion in the recent weeks. But still, even in the Great Britain, which is really inclined, or which is really so positive always to Israel's official position and diplomacy, we all know that since the foundation of Israel. But even in this country, in UK, now we cannot defend this position of Mr. Netanyahu, who really opposes even this United Nations very objective humanitarian attempts.
Let's bring Mr. Gross in. What is your reaction to what is going on? And obviously somebody else that has spoken out is the US Embassy, isn't it?
That's right. The US Embassy yesterday took the exceptional step of issuing a statement accusing the Western media, including very prominent American media, the New York Times, Associated Press, and CNN, of broadcasting blatantly fake, falsified images from Gaza, and said that on Sunday the IDF had not shot anyone. And I should also add that, yes, European media who tend to be very critical of Israel are showing horrific scenes. But if you watch other media, you get very different scenes. For example, in India, they have broadcast footage of Hamas gunmen opening fire at Gazans trying to go to get food from the new Gazan Humanitarian Foundation food distribution points. Now, what's going on here? Clearly, there is great suffering for many people in Gaza, but there is also an exceptional amount of food and aid going into Gaza. In the last 3 days, according to the United States, 900 trucks of food and aid have entered Gaza. To put that in context, in Sudan, which has 50 times bigger population than Gaza, 25 times bigger, it's 50 million people as opposed to 2 million people. In Sudan, during the entire last 2 years of starvation and real famine, 1,500 trucks of aid have gone in. So just in the last few days, almost as many trucks of aid have gone into Gaza as in 2 years in Sudan. So what Israel and the United States and others say is there is ample food in Gaza, and what's happening is that Hamas, in collusion with elements of the United Nations, and we know that elements of the United Nations collude with Hamas. They themselves have admitted it. Some UN personnel participated in the October 7th attacks. In other cases, you had UN staff helping rocket launching crews fire rockets into Israel. So what America and Israel say, which is why they've set up this alternative mechanism, is the UN is totally compromised by Hamas, and Hamas use the food being given by being sent into Gaza to keep a grip over Gaza. And the reason that the Hamas and some of their allies in the UN are sort of desperately making up and fabricating
let's think about this alternative mechanism. Now this is the second reported incident in 3 days. Surely there's questions for Israel in terms of this mechanism and how Israel distributes aid. Is it working if we're getting 2 of these reported incidents?
Well, clearly it's still a work in progress. First of all, I could say about half of the food in Gaza is still distributed by the UN, about half by this new mechanism. The mechanism's been running a few days. It's hard to know whether it will succeed, but the idea behind it is to wrest control away from Hamas, to distribute food directly to Gazan civilians so it's not hoarded by Hamas, that use it to maintain a grip on control on the population. Yes, it doesn't look like it's going as smoothly as it should do, and we would hope it would do, but it's early days. The alternative is to go back to the previous arrangement that simply strengthened Hamas and made it easier for them to stay in control and prolong this bloody and awful war.
Dr. Demirtaş, what do you make of what Mr. Gross is saying, and also this process of distributing aid in Gaza?
Yes, all the problem starts with maybe Mr. Gross is always underlining Hamas equalized with Palestine. Somehow, yes, the elections in every country, in every state, due to elections, we have some parties, we have some groups, we have some political, of course, voices in every country. This is maybe number one rule of some, popular voices. We know that. But first of all, we think also that Hamas can have some, important mistakes, maybe in some distributing issues, in maybe having some, increasing and decreasing some of the voices inside the community, even in the Palestinian different factions, different political groupings. We know that still there are important divergences between the Palestinian people also, but still, that doesn't explain that some of the mistakes, which are really directly undertaken by Mr. Netanyahu's government and directly undertaken by the ministers of Mr. Netanyahu, and especially by popularly always declare to the media that all this issue will be solved with some harsh, with some very militarily, devastating solutions, with the, of course, help of these Israel special attacks. No, it is not maybe the solution especially for such a phase of the problem. Because just 2-3 months ago, we had very fruitful and we had very, hopeful period with the ceasefire attempts. I really remember that. Also, we had also very good programs with any of that. We spoke that some things can really go positively. In the first phase, in the second phase, and in one of those programs, I said that now in the second, especially in the second and maybe third phase, we really need some very objective people, some really objective maybe institutions. And I'm very sorry to tell that, even Mr. Gross accept or not, United Nations is the only maybe and still most encompassing institutions in the world diplomacy. And we must believe and we must trust this diplomacy can work. And of course, we can some diplomatic, misunderstandings, diplomatic grievances we can have. But unfortunately, I also served nearly 15 years as a diplomat, and I can say that power maximization is the real problem also in all the states' policies. And even in the United Nations, if you can see some mistakes, we must come together, first of all, not close the doors to all the aid attempts, to all these humanitarian attempts, which are, first of all, led by this United Nations organization.
Now, one of the talking points here is the fact that Israel doesn't allow international news organisations into Gaza. So in terms of verifying these incidents and what's going on, where does that leave us?
In every conflictual area, some states have some hesitations, and some states do not lead, as you said, that some news agencies, some news and some, of course, aid organizations can enter freely to such conflict areas. We can understand somehow. But after a point, after a while, if such a force became a very dominant force, like in the case of Israel, we must accept that Israel had important, bases, important intelligence, important military capabilities inside this region for nearly 50 years, maybe more than 50 years. But now we can say that Israel, like it had, built all these forces like last year. No, it had all built these special units for longer years inside this region. Now it must trust itself. Of course, we know that Hamas can sell other strategies, Hamas some other political agendas it can have, like every political organization has, in the region. Middle East, very contradictory and very complicated region, if you accept or not. It is the reality of this history also, because the intersections of all the civilizations. But still, we can say that this news is the independence, especially independent news, is what we need in the age of, YouTube, in the age of all these postmodern technologies and this international information age. How we can censor, how we can, hinder all these news agencies inside the region.
Mr. Gross, I want to bring this to you. So one of the talking points here is how we verify what is going on in Gaza, and I think this statement from the US Embassy really speaks to that. Now, Israel doesn't allow international news organisations into Gaza, so where does that leave us in terms of verifying what's happening in Gaza?
Well, look, always in wars, there's what's called the fog of war. There's a lot of disinformation and misinformation. Israel says that journalists will, end up getting themselves killed to enter the middle of a war zone in a very small territory. But it's not that difficult for international media to, at least have a little bit of skepticism when Hamas just issue some statement claiming that this hospital was hit or so-and-so died. We've seen consistently, both in this war and in the past, how figures have just been made up or entire incidents have been made up. I just want to address your previous question, though, about the UN that I got cut off from before. Yes, the UN has a role, UNHCR, which is the main body for refugees, but UNRWA, which is a special body set up only for the Palestinians, has been compromised. And that's why Israel, and indeed I should say various European governments, absolutely do not trust UNRWA. They also have Western officials just making stuff up. Only last week, a senior UN official said that 14,000 babies died within 48 hours in Gaza. He told the BBC flagship Radio 4 Today program, it's just nonsense. So yes, maybe some emotionally heated UN officials are also capable of saying things that are totally untrue, and all this makes it harder to to bring peace that we all want and to move ahead with a better situation.
I want to bring Dr. Dermitage in here, as you're saying the UN officials are making stuff up. Do you agree with that, Dr. Dermitage?
Some officials.
Just I can only remember, again, Mr. Secretary General, I think it is the first months of this conflict. And we have a very famous, of course, expression in diplomacy. It was persona non grata, as all maybe public opinion knows that. The person who is prohibited to enter the country. And maybe the human history, I mean the diplomatic history, has an important shame with the decision of Israel. I don't know the latest situation, but still, I cannot find any logical and any rational, also irrational explanation to find such a, decision of Israeli country that Mr. Antonio Guterres cannot enter this area. How can it possible? Mm-hmm. Now, I think a flotilla, a small ship is on the way. Also Ms. Greta Thunberg, I think an activist, and some of the other activists are on this boat. And I will be, of course, many of us are very worried about this situation because, the recent years, we had also some very important casualties, civilian casualties. And I hope that such personalities, innocent personalities, will be not harmed in such an atmosphere where maybe the highest diplomat, maybe the highest authority in diplomacy, which, in my belief, actually, it is the Secretary General of the United Nations. And now, if Israel denies such a personality, what can it make, in the next step? So, I think there must be definite change in Mr. Netanyahu's government. There must be definite change in diplomacy of Israel. We still trust Israel's democracy. We still trust Israel's stable authority, which once make, a stable atmosphere in the Middle East for a while. But still, I think they must accept, first of all, some atrocities, some deep atrocities really was carried on and still is continuing.
Mr. Gross, I want to bring you back to this statement from Washington. Why do you think that Washington felt the need to get involved in this? And something that was mentioned in the statement is what's going on in the US, in the sentiment in the US at the moment.
Yes, look, I realise it's hard for people to believe that the UN, which people talk about in sort of lofty terms, might not always be a force for good. But what is the UN? It's a collection of, the majority collection of dictatorial governments who group together, who don't have that much in common, but one thing they have in common is let's attack the world's only Jewish state. It's a kind of modern form of anti-Semitism in international politics. That doesn't mean that Israel shouldn't be criticized. Of course, Israel is not perfect. Of course, Israel should be criticized where criticism is warranted. But that's not what the UN or indeed elements of the media are doing. This relentless bashing of Israel is leading, according to the statement from Washington, to attacks on Jews in the United States and elsewhere. So we had in Boulder, Colorado, a peaceful vigil where 8 Jews were set on fire on Sunday afternoon, including an 88-year-old Holocaust survivor who managed to survive the Holocaust, where, of course, 6 million Jews were burned to death in gas chambers and crematorium and other methods. He managed to survive that, only to be set on fire when holding a peaceful vigil in Boulder, Colorado. And so what Washington is saying is all this invective, exaggeration, fake news and stuff, free Palestine. This is not just about freeing Palestine. We all want a better world. We want to free Palestine. We want every country to be free. But this is a kind of agitated, provocative, incendiary movement that goes way beyond protest and is leading to actual violence against random innocent Jews. We have the governor of Pennsylvania Democrat Josh Shapiro's house being set on fire while he was having a Passover Seder with his family this April, 2 months ago, again in the name of Palestine. This is not protest. So the US government is linking, and I would agree with them, inflammatory statements by people like the UN Secretary General and others in the media that go way beyond any criticism of Israel. You know, I'm in Israel.
Now,
and
Mr. Gross, you say this is, you know, you've mentioned anti-Semitism here in terms of the UN and the role, and now if Israel has that view of the UN, where does that leave collaboration for a ceasefire, and where does that leave Israel diplomatically, if that's how the UN is viewed?
Well, as we know, the main ceasefire negotiations are being carried out with the aid of Qatar and Egypt through the Trump administration. They're not being carried out through the UN. Trump's envoy, Witkoff, is negotiating or trying to bridge a ceasefire, and they're using Qatar and Egypt. Now, Qatar is essentially an ally of Hamas. Egypt more neutral. America is closer to Israel. So you have three parties here representing, you know, essentially Qatar represents Hamas. So we, as your other guest pointed out, we succeeded in getting a ceasefire that lasted a few weeks and saw a pause in fighting in January. We hope there'll again be another ceasefire, but there's a huge sticking point, which is whether it would be whether it will mark Hamas giving up power. As your guest, the doctor, said, there may be individual Hamas members who will play a role in post-war Gaza, but only if they renounce jihad, only if they want to become a normative political party that wants
I'm
to
going to bring Dr. Dermitage back in here, as there's a lot to unpack, and one thing I do want to bring to him. Do you agree that Qatar is essentially Hamas, and that's where we are in terms of finding a ceasefire? Okay, thank you.
Yes, accusation. I mean, this, of course, making direct, quotations and direct maybe references to such alliances. It's just, you know, the reality of the Middle East. Maybe such alliances we had always. I mean, think about Israel's position. Always very stronger allies, Israel, since the foundation. And I was, of course, always so hopeful, also in my, DT years, but now as an academician, I'm still hopeful that this diplomacy really found it's one of the humanitarian phase with the United Nations. I'm now so sorry to hear that United Nations is, at least by some valuable expert, it is not so trusted so openly. It is very, very sorry to hear such word, because if Second World War gives to the world some humanitarian conclusions, it's one of the important things is this Declaration of Human Rights, and of course United Nations. And after that, of course, 2-3 years later, we also see that the foundation of Israeli state. I think all these developments are so connected. Please, I also want to remind that because of this humanitarian results of this post-Second World War era, we found such a diplomatic atmosphere. But of course, in 60s and 70s, we see another conflict still going on. And yes, Qatar is a different actor. Qatar now shining maybe, of course, with the United Arab Emirates too. But Arab Emirates is much more maybe a shining star of economic affairs like the new Singapore. And now Qatar is maybe made an important step with some political roles. But we cannot find and we cannot labeling them directly with such a word, because Egypt is also very in a conflictual position. But still, of course, United States under Mr. Trump, it can also take some very different decisions. In one day, Mr. Trump can really have some critical point now, and the other day we can start very different decision with the hands of course, Mr. Trump. And now we will watch them, and still, Mr. Netanyahu is now still the key personality in all this crisis atmosphere. I believe this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dermitage. And that brings this edition of Context to a close. This morning's report of fatalities close to an aid point being run by a newly created body backed by the US and Israel follows a warning from the UN about the way Israel aid is now being delivered. It's roughly the same location where the Hamas-run health ministry says Israeli forces killed 31 people on Sunday, a claim that Israel denies. Of course, this is a developing story and we'll continue to bring you the latest here on A News. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.